Our first speaker is Bill Aim. Bill works for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. He's a native Iowan from Creston, Iowa. And so he went to Iowa State, came back to the area, and was farming for about 20 years. In 1989, he was appointed by Governor Branstad to the Environmental Protection Commission. He served 3 terms there. And then in 2000, he began working full-time for DNR, focusing on the intersection of water quality and agriculture. But through these various experiences, he has a lot of different perspectives. The perspective of a farmer, the perspective of setting environmental policy as a commissioner, the perspective of administering policies as a DNR employee. Our second speaker is Larry Weber. We've already heard a little bit about Larry with his relationship as a leader of the Iowa Flood Center, but he also does research and kind of primarily in the areas of fish passage structures, large river mitigation, large river restoration, flood mitigation, and improvements to water quality, and is served on a number of state committees. And then Julie Tallman, she works with the City of Iowa City. Julie says she's not a native Iowan, but she's been here long enough where she's a native Iowan. Graduate of the Urban and Regional Planning Department at the University of Iowa. And in 1993, started working for the city as the floodplain administrator. In 1995, assumed those duties. At that time, Iowa City was just adopting some new floodplain ordinances with respect to protection of wetlands, woodlands, native prairies, and waterways. And then in 1999, she served on the Flood Advisory Board for the Water Resources Coordinating Council. Well, she has done that, and in 1999 served, assisted with the Iowa Wetland and Riparian Areas Conservation Plan. Co-founder and past chair of the Iowa Floodplain and Stormwater Management Association, one of these newer organizations that came out of the 2008 floods. We'll hear Julie talk about in a little bit. And she's also lobbied for state and local national legislation related to the Swansea Supreme Court decision in 2001, where isolated wetlands were no longer deemed to be under the purview of the Army Corps of Engineers. So with that, I'm going to let Bill start us off. The plan for this session is we intentionally trying to keep our remarks short so that there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. So each of the speakers will have a short presentation, and then we'll open it up. Okay? Thanks.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today. And as probably others have indicated before me, it's a little eerie driving through the Skunk River Valley and seeing miles of water and then coming into Cedar Rapids and seeing them across the alley filling sandbags, particularly when this whole thing was scheduled a number of months ago when we were still in the throes of a drought. So I guess one of the things that I want to talk about today is the role of the Department of Natural Resources and some of the things that we have done and working with our partners at universities and other state agencies, federal government, primarily local communities, and how we're working to address floods. Oh, yeah, I figured out how to work it. Okay. First of all, foremost, flood events are predictable, natural occurrences, but their impact can be greatly reduced. And I think that's one of the things that we can't just throw up our arms and say that they're going to happen, and we can't ignore them thinking that they're never going to happen again. They will, and that's just the way our world is designed. At the Department of Natural Resources, we approach flood management, and I think with our partners in kind of a threefold way. And the first is we're looking to try to modify the effects of flooding, and that's structural types of changes. That we know that flooding is going to occur. Structurally, we can construct levees. We can design systems to route water in a different way. We can insert structures up in a watershed so that maybe we retain the water up there in the watershed for a longer period of time so that it reduces the flooding. But largely what we're doing, we're talking about a structural type of practice. The second thing that we look at is those types of non-structural practices that we might put in place. And that is primarily get out of the way. We know that flooding is going to occur. And an old Indian quotation is that rivers have memories, and they will come back again and again and flood in the same spots. We can control them to a great degree with those structural practices, but in large part what we try to do is limit any kind of development in a floodplain. We try to at least, if something has to be in a floodplain, raise it to the point of where we think that it's going to be at least beyond the 1 in 100 opportunity or a 100-year flood event, so that we're above that, at least a foot above that. In other cases, we try to avoid really anything within that floodway. Basically get things out of the way as best we can. And then finally, we look at the mitigation practices that might be in place. And that is if indeed flooding does occur, and it will occur, what are those types of national flood insurance programs? What do we have that we've got federal disaster programs? Those types of things that can help people and communities respond after the flooding has occurred so that they can continue to go on with their lives. And you can see what we try to do there is preserve those natural values, preserving that floodplain so that it can function the way it should, and that is as moving water. And looking at all three of these and all these different practices we use as just one of many strategies in a toolbox, if you will, for dealing with floods. In 2009, following the 2008 floods here, the Iowa legislature asked the Water Resources Coordinating Council, and that was a council that interestingly enough, had just been formed in the 2008 legislative session. But one of the first tasks that was sent to the Water Resources Coordinating Council was to organize and come up with some recommendations on how we are to deal with floods in the future and what types of policy things can we be looking at to reduce the impacts of floods, what kind of investments can we make, how can we avoid the disastrous events in the future. And so Chuck Gipp, who is, at the time was with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship and is now the director of the Department of Natural Resources, Chuck and I co-chaired that team. And one of the things we started out with was the idea that if we are just to continue to do what we've done in the past, we're going to be crazy if we think we're going to change things. So what we tried to do was come up with some recommendations that we thought would really have some long-lasting impact. I'm not going to go through all of these recommendations here, but there were a number of different aspects. Some of them were regulatory in nature. The one thing there, the last one in particular, is that the 2008 floods, there was critical infrastructure that had to be abandoned or was unable to get to because it had been built in a floodplain. One of the recommendations of the Coordinating Council was that critical infrastructure, we're talking about medical facilities, we're talking about fire and police protection, those types of things, they need to be protected at a higher level, and access, the roads to and from those facilities need to be protected to a higher level. Other things we looked at were watershed-based. One of the things that was suggested is we need a hydrologic tiling study, a watershed demonstration pilot. We need to update our stormwater permits, urban stormwater permitting system to design systems in there to prevent some of those things. You can see those three things that I rattled off are highlighted, and the reason is because we actually have some progress there now. We've got a group of people that are actually studying the impacts of tile and how that relates to flooding. Larry, I think, or at least I hope, is going to talk about watershed demonstration pilot that the Iowa Flood Center is involved in. We have updated our urban stormwater permits so that hopefully we can create, after construction, a landscape that will be more absorbent for water, kind of like what Dr. Cruz was talking earlier today, so that we can actually get that soil to absorb some of that water so that it doesn't run off to begin with. One of the other things that, frankly, I neglected to put a slide in here, but one of the major things that the council talked about was education. And two aspects of that we're also making some progress on. One is some educational. We've already got the Iowa State University extension system throughout the state working on different aspects of education in a variety of venues. And one of the things we looked at was trying to work with that group to develop an educational system for people in communities so they understand their risks and how they can avoid the risk of flooding in the future. And we were able to secure some funding to actually to at least get started on something like that. The other one is the development of the Floodplain Managers Association. The recommendation was that we as a state should be facilitating that. And Julie can talk about that a little bit more later, because we actually have had some success in getting that going. It's some remarkable success. And then finally, there were a number of funding recommendations. We tried to avoid the big dollar items in our recommendations, but we had to recognize that some things cost money. And one of the things is that the council recommended that the floodplain management section of the Iowa DNR that works largely with communities to help them determine where it's safe to actually to build infrastructure in a community near the floodplain, and then actually helps those communities deal with the National Flood Insurance Program, that continue to be funded. And then also that the Iowa Flood Center, which had been created immediately post the floods, that continue to be funded because of the value that's going to bring to the whole equation of trying to avoid the damage from floods. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Dr. Weber and let him take the next section.
Great, thanks, Bill. I just have a few slides I'd like to share with folks here today. Some of the, again, opportunities and challenges. We've touched on it, or I've touched on it already, but certainly one of the opportunities has been the creation of the Iowa Flood Center in the state of Iowa, working in partnership with state and federal agencies here. We do feel like we've become a go-to resource for flood-related information in the state, and I know that as we were developing our sessions and thinking about questions that we would ask all of our panelists, we always were posing the panels around how would things be different this year if we would experience a flood. And in fact, we are experiencing that flood, and I think the calls to the Flood Center, the use of the Iowa Flood Information System, and the way that we've been able to engage with communities and individual citizens in Iowa is a direct indication of how well we've done with the Iowa Flood Center in helping communities better prepare themselves for floods. So we're very delighted again by the vision and leadership in the legislature. We worked on one-year funding for the first 3 years, and just 2 years ago we're moved over into the general fund under Governor Branstad's administration. So we're very appreciative of that, and hopefully we'll be able to continue on for many years. The Iowa Watersheds project, which has been touched on a couple times this morning, did come out of those legislative recommendations back in the 2010 legislative session. It is an opportunity for us to try to think about flood damage reduction by putting projects for public good on private lands. And because Iowa is predominantly privately owned, we need to work in partnership with private landowners to find practices that work with in their needs and their interest usually in an agricultural production capacity, and yet are providing public good. And we have watersheds that we're working with, and I point those out as the green shaded areas there. The Turkey River, the Upper Cedar, the Middle South Raccoon, and Soap and Shequest Creek in southern Iowa are 4 watersheds that we're working with. We're developing hydrologic models of those 4 watersheds to better understand how water runs off the landscape during heavy precipitation events. That's in a phase 1 portion of the Iowa Watersheds project. Phase 2 is just beginning now. as we speak, and phase 2 is a program where we're working with 3 of those watersheds, the Turkey, the Upper Cedar, and Chiquest Creeks, to build about $5 million of projects and determine the benefit that those projects provide locally. Rather than distributing those monies uniformly over those entire Huck 8 watersheds, we're targeting the implementation of those projects in smaller sub-basins at the Huck 12 scale in the Turkey, the Upper Cedar, and in Chiquest Creek, and using those as demonstration projects. And we've been very fortunate in that particular program where we've been able to complete our phase 1 assessment. Phase 1 assessment relied very heavily on some information and modeling and a program down in the Soap Creek watershed. And then we're moving into phase 2 and hopefully applying those same techniques in these other watersheds. So the Turkey has selected the Otter Creek watershed, which is a small watershed surrounding West Union. That's been a very proactive community in Iowa with stormwater management. The Upper Cedar just met this week, and their board has adopted Beaver Creek as their Huck 12 that they'll be working on, a small watershed just east of Charles City, and Chiquest Creek is already underway as well. Now, interestingly, this is the Soap Creek watershed, and of course we have numerous model simulations and information to share about Soap Creek, but Soap Creek is one of these wonderful examples of how Iowans work and work together to improve flood resiliency in Iowa. Soap Creek folks realized back in the mid-'80s that their land practices were changing the hydrologic response of the Soap Creek watershed. And as landowners, they came together, they worked with local technical staff, with the NRCS and Soil and Water Conservation District offices, and so we need a plan. We need a plan that will help to hold some water back in our watershed to decrease the flashiness of the Soap Creek during heavy rainfall. And that plan was issued back in about 1986. The plan identified around 150 different water holding projects throughout the watershed. And as of 2012, I'm just so proud to say for that watershed, they've implemented 132 of those projects. All of the projects that were implemented had a cost-benefit analysis done at a very local scale, a line-of-sight type scale. So when they built a project, they reduced stream flow in a small tributary, and they were usually able to replace an aging 100-year-old secondary roads bridge with a concrete box culvert or a corrugated metal pipe. But nobody had really gone back and done an assessment to see what was the cumulative benefit of those 132 projects. So part of the modeling work that we've been doing at the Iowa Flood Center has been to do that type of an assessment. And what you can see here is as we go from the upper part of the watershed, it flows from left to right on the screen. The areas of greater topographic relief are good places to build farm ponds. These ponds generally range in size from 1/4 of an acre to the largest being 26 acres. But we see a 70% reduction in stream flow in the upper part of the watershed where we have more control. And then as we move further down into the watershed, about a 40% reduction at the outlet. And as we've talked to other watershed groups in the English River, they're forming a watershed management authority. You know, the question posed to them was, would a 40% reduction in the stream flow of the April 17th and 18th event of this year, would that have been a benefit to the community? And the obvious response is yes. And so we really hope that this kind of activity is the vision for Iowa. This is a multi-generational view. It's going to take us a long time and a lot of funding to be able to get there, but we've got to work hand in hand. We've got to work rural and ag interest along with urban areas, and that's been demonstrated that it can be done, and I believe that we will do it. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. First, let me say what an honor it is to be included in the speakers for this event. I am privileged to share the story of the Iowa Floodplain and Stormwater Management Association with all of you here. And let's see. Okay. Jeff Pomerantz talked about the necessity of integration and communication between agencies. And the story of IFSMA is truly a story of the importance of knowing what agencies are out there and how we can come together to work together and make things better for our state. After the floods of 2008, as you've already heard, the state legislature directed the Water Resources Coordinating Council to encourage and support a state chapter of the Association of State Floodplain Managers. The Association of State Floodplain Managers, or ASFPM, is headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin. It is a national organization of professionals, and I'm going to have to read all this because it's from their mission statement. Professionals involved in floodplain management, flood hazard mitigation, the National Flood Insurance Program, and flood preparedness, warning, and recovery. Its mission is to promote education, policies, and activities that mitigate current and future losses, costs, and human suffering caused by flooding, and to protect the natural and beneficial functions of floodplains. That is also the mission of the Iowa Floodplain and Stormwater Management Association. This slide just shows where chapters are located in the United States, and I don't think anything's changed recently. Iowa became the 31st chapter. Oops. I don't know where the other slide is. That's okay. It doesn't matter. The legislature wanted a state chapter of ASFPM because our elected officials recognized that Iowa floodplain managers needed educational opportunities, and they also needed a professional organization that would encourage professional achievement and recognize those achievements. Staff from the Rebuild Iowa office were given the go-ahead to assist us with forming a state chapter, and the Iowa Floodplain and Stormwater Management Association, which I'm going to now refer to as IFSMA, was officially given a charter in 2011. Between 2009 and 2010, we had to grow our organization from scratch, and I don't know how many of you have ever done that. It is quite an undertaking. We were busy filing articles of incorporation, getting our federal employer identification number, writing bylaws, adopting resolutions, and all the other necessary paperwork. At the same time, though, we managed to triple the number of certified floodplain managers in the state of Iowa to roughly 45. We did that by partnering with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, the Iowa Flood Center, the Iowa Water Conference, and Dewberry and Davis out of Fairfax, Virginia. Our membership at this point has grown to roughly 100, and now that we have our liability insurance and our 501c3 status, we can focus more on offering educational programs online and in person. We are in the midst of developing 4 training modules under contract with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. One, the Community Rating System Toolkit, was rolled out officially at this year's Iowa Water Conference. A flood response toolkit is currently under development and is under review, I believe, now by the Department of Natural Resources. We are also consulting on revisions to the floodplain manager's desk reference. And building on that, we are going to be developing a training program for officials in communities that have delegated community status from the Department of Natural Resources. That is, they are able to enforce their floodplain regulations locally. The more Iowa communities that can become delegated communities means less work for the IDNR in processing rather routine paperwork. So we want to make sure that we can increase those communities and make the officials within them better educated and able to do their jobs. In the next few years, we'll be partnering on annual conferences and workshops with ASFPM chapters in Wisconsin and Minnesota and Nebraska. We're developing a series of lunch and learn programs, and we will continue to partner, as we have for the past several years, with the Iowa Water Conference in Ames in March, typically. Thank you, members of the Iowa Legislature and the Water Resources Coordinating Council, for your early support of IFSMA. I also want to thank my supervisor, Tim Hennis, at the City of Iowa City for giving me the freedom that I needed to pursue the establishment of this chapter, and note that in July I will be stepping down as chair. I'll become past chair, and Leanne Harder in Story County will be the chair for the next, hopefully, several years until she times out of the position as per our bylaws. I have some brochures as well that I will get to somebody. We can put perhaps on the table in the back, and any of you that are interested, please take one. Thank you.
Okay, in the earlier session, Joe mentioned that on each of your tables there's a series of note cards. If you have any questions, you feel free to write them down and can pass them up front. I can read them out, or if you just feel comfortable standing up and asking your question, that's fine. So I just wanted to start out with one question for the panel, and then open it up to the audience. So the three talks really overlap in terms of this emphasis at the state level. Okay, that may be in terms of programs and policy. It may be the state level in terms of analysis for research. It may be state level in terms of funding. And it's certainly something that we've seen an expansion of state involvement since 2008. I'm wondering how crucial do you think this is to further reductions in flood impacts? Do you see this role expanding?
Yeah, I'll take first crack at that. I think the best government is that's local, and when we're making decisions about where to build or what to protect and those types of things, I think those decisions are made best locally. The actual law that requires the Department of Natural Resources to have a floodplain management section also allows us to delegate a lot of that authority to the local communities. So, such as the case in Iowa City and where Julie works, it allows that community to actually make those decisions themselves, and as long as they follow the Iowa law, it works well. It gets complicated when the federal insurance program is a federal program. But we work very hard to work communities, and particularly small communities, up and down, from anywhere from, hundreds of people all the way up to tens or hundreds of thousands, to try to help them understand their options with the flood insurance program at the federal level and what their opportunities are there.
I would just like to add, I think at the state level, I think it's really important to recognize that we need to have that state leadership for locals to follow. We need to have demonstrated state leadership. I know the tireless support and work of Senator Hogue that he's done at the state level is tremendously important. And that state leadership needs to enable the locals with the right types of programs, policy, and if possible, funding. But it does have to happen locally, and I think we have demonstrations of wonderful local activities where folks have decided on their own. They're not waiting. They're going to move forward. They're going to come together. And with the WMAs, I've encouraged them to think very long-term in that as they've applied for funding, whether they've been successful or not, it's not about one grant. It's about a long-term vision, and that local vision has to remain strong. And so I think it's this blend from local to state with some state leadership.
I don't have much to add to that. I think the importance of local management really makes me think of the remarkable diversity in our landscape across the state. I mean, from the Prairie Pothole region in northern Iowa to riverine communities that experience riverine flooding. Local authority is so important because a local person is going to have a more intimate knowledge of the landscape that she or he works in. But I agree. The leadership from the state has made all the difference.
Okay, we have a few questions. First is, say we had the exact same precipitation and stream flow situations as in 2008. What do you think the levels of damage would be now, based on what we've learned since then?
So maybe I'll respond to that first. I think the levels of damages would be reduced. I think that without any question, the type of information that's available, not only through the Iowa Flood Center, but also through local communities and other councils of government, there's more information available, more quantitative information. We at the Flood Center have more visual information with our maps. The local media has been using those online to show the extensive floods. I think that's a tremendous resource that wasn't as available to the public in 2008. And there were folks that simply didn't take the protective measures themselves to move cars and personal belongings out of harm's way. That could be avoided this time. So that's one at the very local level. City governments have been able to install a number of flood protection measures since 2008. We're seeing that in Cedar Rapids, clearly in Coralville, Iowa City, and at the university campus. So the protective measures themselves will protect infrastructure as well. So I think the level of damage would be significantly less. At this point, though, the water that lands on the land surface and moves downstream would be very similar, because we haven't done much in terms of holding water back yet.
Speaking about Iowa City, the number of homes that we've removed from the 100-year floodplain, the critical facilities, the infrastructure that's been moved out of the floodplain since 2008 is absolutely going to result in a lot less damage. But we'll see, what we don't think about. Part of my responsibilities at Iowa City is also managing stormwater quality from construction sites. And when you see the amount of pollution that is carried downstream in a flood event, that's another issue that I think I'd like to see us. I don't even know where to begin with that, because the water just takes everything, and that's not going to change.
Okay, we had another question. This one's for Julie. Tell us more about the community rating system and for reducing NFIP premiums, National Flood Insurance Program premiums.
The community rating system is getting a lot of attention right now because in the Bigger Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act that's going to be guiding national policy for the next 5 years, flood insurance premiums are going to be increasing by 20 to 25% annually until they reflect actuarial, statistically based risk. Okay, so the program has been largely federally subsidized. FEMA says in one of their reports that only about 20% of the NFIP policies are subsidized, but I looked at a printout of the impact of Bigger Waters on Iowa, and ours is closer to 40%. So people are really going to be feeling it in the state of Iowa. Community rating system is basically a menu of activities that are undertaken by a community, which can include a county. Interestingly, Lynn County has a county-based community rating system, which is pretty interesting. So Iowa City is now in the community rating system. Our insurance policies are automatically discounted by 10% for properties in the high-risk areas. Trying not to get too bureaucratic about this, but a lot of the activities are centered around public information and outreach, having information on a website that's 2 clicks away from the homepage, for instance, and then you putting out an annual notice in the water bills, holding special events, and then there are other credit achieving activities as well, like showing that your community has a regular storm sewer inspection or stormwater intake inspection program. You keep all these things together, you submit annual reports, and according to the level of activity your community, your city, your county engages in, you're then given a ranking. And discounts can actually accumulate all the way up to 45%. On flood insurance premiums. So as I said, we're seeing, I think there was only 1 or 2 communities in Iowa that were part of the community rating system. Now we've got Cedar Rapids, Des Moines, Davenport, Iowa City, Lynn County, I think Cedar Falls is entering in it as well. Anyway, you can see it's blossoming. And because of those premium increases that are coming down annually, it's becoming more and more important.
All right, this question's for Larry. Is the information gained by the Iowa Flood Center being shared with people in other river basins in the state, nationally, internationally?
Yeah, and so we're developing that information real time. I mean, every day it seems like we're moving the stick forward in terms of our information, and so any opportunity that we have to present to communities, we do a lot of service club talks to Rotaries. We do a lot of organized talks to community leadership to make that information available. It's all available on our website at iowafloodcenter.org. As academics, of course, we travel regionally, nationally, and internationally to talk about the Flood Center, and we're seeing a tremendous positive response to those presentations as well. I gave a keynote last year down in Florida. That's led to some interest of potentially developing a Florida flood information system that could mirror and follow along the Iowa flood information system. Just a tremendous amount of interest out there. Now, from a very technical perspective, of course, we really do want to be able to engage with more people in Iowa, especially in other watersheds. As we've gone through a couple rounds of funding calls for watershed level, watershed management type groups, I've been speaking with a number of watersheds, the English being the latest one, about creating a watershed management authority and really taking the vision of their watershed and moving that forward. And so I can continue to spread that message that that type of organization is going to be very advantageous when competing for future state and federal funds.
Yes.
This question, as you look at a map of Iowa, you see that we have 4 next rad radars sweeping our state. And looking at the other side, when we have a drought problem, how much money would it take for us to be able to give our Iowa farmers a topographical map showing the cumulative rainfall that it's fallen, like over a couple thousand acres that they might be farming, so that they could then better know what hybrids to plant and what various fields that they own. Right now, I think they're kind of guessing, and the government has given us this capability. It seems like all we have to do is develop the software. Maybe the sensors aren't good enough to do this, but we're doing it in other places. Why not in Iowa?
Well, no,
So the question is, we have access to a lot of real-time precipitation information through technology like NextRad, but what would also be useful is to have some cumulative rainfall information as a resource to farmers. What technology is out there? Why aren't we doing that? Is that about right?
Yeah, and so just a quick response to that. So in terms of cumulative rainfall, we make cumulative rainfall maps available for Iowa right now. So you can go to the Iowa Flood Center website and see cumulative rainfall by day, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, all the way back to 14 days. 14 days being significant because that's about the travel time of water in our longest watersheds from the Des Moines watershed. So that's already available. The resolution is, it's at NextRad scale resolution, so on the order of a 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer. So it's really pretty detailed. Just this year, we also added to our information system about 25 dual tipping bucket rain gauges because it's really, measuring water in a bucket still, the best that we can do, I guess, and better than NextRad reflectivity. But at those locations where we have those 25 rain gauges, we have soil moisture probes and soil temperature probes at 2, 4, 8, and 20 inches of depth. And that's part of our iFloods deployment experiment that we have with NASA this year. But we are strong advocates for developing a hydrologic information network across Iowa that would serve both floods and droughts, as well as the agricultural commodity producers out there, because soil temperature and soil moisture are, I think, king. They're drivers in terms of when to plant and what to plant. And at a relatively low cost, we could do that at least one per county. I think that'd give us a pretty good resolution across the state.
Does the Farm Bureau know that this information is near term?
I can't speak for the Farm Bureau.
Okay, we got a question for the whole panel.
That was what?
We have a question for the whole panel, and it actually touches on some comments that Bill had earlier. And I know Julie's job experience, actually. In the view of changing rainfall patterns and amounts, how should we respond with regard to regulation of construction in floodplains to be prepared for future events?
Well, as the one slide indicated up there, the council looked at some of these things and determined that there probably were some appropriate changes that needed to be made. The council actually did recommend that rather than regulating to the 1 in 100 year event, that we actually regulate to 1 in 500. That have been a big change for the state. In some communities, that would have been a dramatic change. In other communities, it probably wouldn't have been quite so dramatic. I think it's something that we need to keep on the table and need to keep working toward. We are in the process right now of developing floodplain maps, working with the Iowa Flood Center to do that cooperatively. We will have floodplain maps that will delineate the 500-year floodplain for the entire state of Iowa. And so then we'll know exactly, what the difference is going to be for any community, what would be regulated in terms of floodplain management and what wouldn't. So those are some of the things we've looked at. We certainly want to continue to prohibit any construction right in the floodway. And being the engineer, Larry can describe to you exactly what the floodway is, but that's just a portion of the floodplain that we want to make sure that is totally clear, so that we can move the water through. So there are some, and then that idea of critical infrastructure, getting that out of the floodplain and out of harm's way. So those are the particular regulatory things that we were talking about. And there have been a couple of communities in the state that have gone ahead and added some ordinances within their own communities to go beyond what state law requires. And so that they're looking at their own situation and say, hey, we can't afford to have this happen to us again. We've got to change ourselves, even if the state isn't going to require us to change. So that's been a real positive thing.
Just ask for clarification. You just talked about the 500-year floodplain, and there's all this discussion about 100-year, 500. And Larry, I know at the last flood symposium you did a nice job of just sort of explaining what that means. It doesn't mean we're not going to have one for 500 years. Kind of running through that.
Yeah, and so it becomes more relevant each day, it seems like, in each year, as 2008, and really in the formation of the Flood Center, at the time I knew it was a tremendous value to the state, but, I wasn't so aware that we would see flooding again in 2009, the Lake Delhi Dam failure in 2010, the Missouri River under flood stage for 100 days in 2011. But the 1% likelihood flow is often referred to as the 100-year flood. That's based on a statistical analysis of stream gauge data. Most times we don't have a full 100 years of record, so we have to do these statistical models to fill it out. The one challenge with it, and the thing that I think is the take-home message, is that as we do that mathematical analysis, the assumption of stationarity is the most invalid assumption of the whole process. So if we have a good 100 years of record, we've seen this morning from Bill and Rick that our stream flow and our precipitation is changing. So when we assume that the data from 100 years ago is equally as valid as the data from last year, that makes that assumption or that 1% flow less certain. And so I think most of us that study in this area see that there's an increased frequency of floods. And so when we've defined and delineated the 1% flow, 1% chance each and every year, independent of the previous years, that is probably not a very accurate estimate, that flow would likely happen more often than 1%.
One of the things that I try to explain to people about these terms is that the likelihood of flooding increases year by year. So over the life of a 30-year mortgage, properties in the 1% annual floodplain actually have like a 26% likelihood of flooding. Again, that's based on a statistical model that isn't perfect, but it sort of opens up people's eyes to, oh, that's what a 100-year flood means? And then The 500 is actually a 0.2%, as you saw in an earlier slide, chance, which over the life of a 30-year mortgage increases to roughly 6%. But the thing about flooding is that we have a pretty good idea where it's most likely to happen. And flood zones are flood zones. One of the things that I find incredible about the whole program is that if the dirt around your house is an inch above the predicted elevation of a flood, a named flood, then you're not required to buy flood insurance. And the whole flood insurance requirement doesn't adequately inform people of their real risk. What if you're living in a house that you paid cash for and you've been there for 10 years, so you didn't go through the vetting that a federally insured financial institution requires you to do? Then even if you can look out your yard and see a river nearby, you don't necessarily get clued in under the current system that you're at risk for flooding. So I think that in the next several years, I would like to see more of an effort. I kind of did this little cartoon last night when I was thinking about today and preparing for questions. We have modeling and forecasting that identify flood risk, and they're accurate. They're really accurate tools. They're getting better all the time. Then we have building codes and zoning regulations that respond to the risk that's shown on these flood maps. We have minimum elevations. Iowa City and Cedar Falls now require elevation to 1 foot above the 0.2% floodplain. Okay. Then we have finance regulations and insurance requirements to protect these risky investments. But so far, it doesn't knit together very well. The dots aren't fully connected. And, you know, I think we should look at our lending practices. Why not? What about Iowa being a leader in requiring lending institutions in the state to require insurance for properties in any floodplain? Not just, the feds say you need it in the 1% floodplain. We have our own state banking laws. Why not look at requiring insurance? And the fact is that insurance rates in those less risky areas are like a quarter of what they are in the higher risk areas. So we're talking a few $100s a year to protect an investment, to protect a homeowner, a business owner. The other thing that I have never really been able to understand, and Larry was going to talk about the floodway. Floodway is based on a model that assumes it's okay for the water, for the flood level to go up by a foot. That's just an implicit allowance that you can build up to the edges of a body of water until you get to the point where you raise the base flood elevation by a foot. Why do we accept that as okay? So there are a few details that I think might be resolved.
Okay, we're about out of time. I have 3 questions left that we didn't get a chance to get to. Before we go into the next session, I'd like to thank the speakers. Thanks.